So, this is a video talking about the death of Stan Lee, one of the last of the old guard of comic book people. People who helped make comic books mainstream and reach a larger audience. If not directly with comics, because the comics industry is kind of faltering, but I don't think that's their fault, but by basically making other mediums where comic book characters could flourish. So, before we get into it, for those of you who are wondering, this is footage captured from Shank. I got it off of the Clay digital sale off of Steam for like $1.99. I had this game for the PS3. Well, I still have my PS3, but my PS3 is boxed up and I don't feel like taking it out. So I just got it on Steam for $1.99. So without much ado, let's get into it after the cut. So, Stan Lee, born in 1922, died in 2018. Man was 95 years old, so I'm not going to say, oh man, it's a shame he died. I mean, the man had lived a full life, so, you know, I'm not going to be like, oh no, he died, it was too soon. Little known fact, I saw Stan Lee at Comic-Con, at the Comic-Con in California like 6-7 years ago. And the man, I mean, for being in his late 80s then, he was in really fucking good shape for his age. Like, unnecessarily good shape. Like, it was like, damn, dude, you look really good for your age. So basically, like, I got him to sign my my Spider-Man omnibus. My Spider-Man omnibus that I got from like Marvel Publishing like years ago, and it's basically like this big omnibus that basically goes over like the start of Spider-Man up to like the Secret Wars. So I got him to sign that in my Spider-Man encyclopedia that I got from like Borders bookstore. So basically Stan Lee, so why is this such an important event that Stan Lee passed? Well, Stan Lee is the guy who basically, along with him, Steve Ditko, and Jack Kirby, they basically created the Silver Age of comics. Because basically, Jack Kirby in the late 50s, early 60s, mostly late 50s, he was getting ready to leave Marvel. Like, he was feeling disenchanted because this was like the morals and decency code that basically came into existence because, you know, some asshole wanted to use comics as a scapegoat for bad parenting and just children just being bad. Decided to essentially use comics as a scapegoat for delinquent children. Like, comics cause delinquency. Kind of like how people like to use video games now. So basically, why is this important? Well, this is important for a variety of reasons. First reason is that this was not good for the industry, and I mean, one titan of comics had already died because of it. EC Comics. EC Comics released Tales from the Crypt and horror stories, stuff like that. Creep Show, stuff like that. So, and DC had to fill the void, which is why DC Comics became big, because EC Comics kind of went out. But Marvel was kind of like going down not going down the drain, but they were stagnating. So basically, Stan Lee was about to leave his job, and his wife said, "Look, before you go, before you give this up, why don't you make the comics you always wanted to make?" Right? So he, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, they made, like, starting in the late 50s, early 60s, they released comics that would basically change the scope of the comic book industry. They released Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, X-Men, Thor, Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk. And the big thing that was so very different that had never been seen before in the comic books industry until that point was that these characters were flawed. They dealt with real shit, you know? They weren't like Bruce Wayne, oh no, this guy came back. Like Spider-Man, Peter Parker had to deal with, man, my aunt has been the victim of a predatory loan and she might lose her house and she might lose the condo, you know? Or Bruce Banner had to deal with having a major anger issue, or the Fantastic Four had to deal with how does a disparate family, very different from one another, how do they deal with being doing the things that families have to do, and it was very interesting. Tony Stark was a cripple, was a major alcoholic asshole. And they created all these characters, all these flawed characters. And it was like things changed. The industry changed. And it was amazing. So basically, Stan Lee, I'm not saying he was the sole architect of it, because, you had Steve Ditko, you had Jack Kirby, who, never got as much credit as he deserved. While he was alive, but posthumously, like, when it comes to drawing comics and showing action in comics and emotion, no one has been able to capture what Jack Kirby could do. And as a matter of fact, his method of doing this is still used in the comics industry today. I would say in some ways Jack Kirby was the Orson Welles of the comic book industry. What I mean is that effects that he used, art techniques that he used in order to tell a story in a visual medium are still being used today in comics, which tells you just how fucking important that was at the time. So, I mean, basically what I'm saying is that, like when Stan Lee passed, he's the last of the old guard of these old comic book people. I mean, yeah, you've got Alan Moore and Frank Miller, but they came about in the 70s and the 80s. Like they weren't to that same level of, whatever. So, like, Stan Lee was the last of the old guard. And, I mean, his accomplishments, what he added to the industry along with the rest of the old guard at Marvel, the bullpen, was amazing. I mean, like, basically, like, Stan Lee, like, Marvel under Stan Lee was able to essentially, for like 20 years, just basically kick DC's ass. All right. Like I would say from the 60s through the 70s, Marvel was kicking their ass. Like Marvel was just consistently kicking DC in the nuts. And it was amazing. Okay. It was beautiful. There were some runs on DC that were pretty damn good, but by and large, Spider-Man was kicking ass. The Hulk was kicking ass. The X-Men were kicking ass. Like, it was just consistently kicking ass. And the cool thing is that, Stan Lee was also releasing allegories. Like, I mean, because if you really think about it, like, Spider-Man is an allegory for a young man going through puberty, right? Like, Peter Parker gets bitten by a spider, he gets stronger, more muscular, and gains the ability to he becomes a little asshole, a little arrogant, starts brustling up on people, and he gains the ability to shoot sticky white fluid at people. I mean, come on, it's fairly obvious what's going on here. Or, Banner the Hulk is a metaphor for people repressing their emotions and how you can't do that. It's not healthy. They were all allegories. The X-Men were an allegory for the civil rights movement, where Magneto was basically Malcolm X, and Charles Xavier was Martin Luther King Jr., and the X-Men themselves, the mutants, were basically people of color, And, I mean, that allegory has translated as society has changed. Like, it became people with AIDS and HIV. It became people who were marginalized through no fault of their own, just by being who they were. And Stan Lee, along with Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and the people at Marvel, were able to do this. something that DC wasn't able to do, and it changed the scope of how comics were done and launched them into pop culture, which is fucking amazing. And that is just badass as fuck. So with that being said, this is a salute to Stan Lee, or as he would say, Excelsior! So, and hang on, true believers! So, I mean, go, in the comment section, tell me what your favorite Stan Lee comic was, what you liked, what you didn't like, who's one of your favorite Marvel characters, Marvel comic book runs, whatever. And that's the end of the video. We'll get to the conclusion after the cut. So stay tuned. There will be a Sci-Fi Power Hour-ish uploaded sometime this week. We will get back into it, but it will be a pre-recorded thing, not live. BS Busters on Sunday, 7:30 to normally 9, but it might go a little bit over this Sunday. And once again, tell me some of your ideas, some of your favorite Marvel characters, Marvel comic runs, whatever. And peace.